CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. A third of the world in recession. The International Monetary Fund warns 2023 will be tough as the US, Europe and China see their economies slow.
Ukraine and Moscow clash over casualty numbers after Kyiv hits a Russian army base in Donetsk.
More shops shutting for good in the UK. The highest number in 5 years. We'll be looking at why.
And out of this world, we look back on a year of space exploration that broke new boundaries.
Recession will hit a third of the global economy in 2023. That's the stark warning from the head of the International Monetary Fund, who said this year will be tougher than last, with the world's biggest economies, the United States, Europe and China, all slowing at the same time.
The war in Ukraine, inflation, higher interest rates and the spread of COVID-19 in China continue to have an effect. The IMF says for the first time in 40 years, China's growth is likely to be the same or lower than the global average.
So let's take a look at how the IMF's global outlook has changed. Now, in 2021, after the coronavirus pandemic, global growth was 6%. For 2022, the IMF expects that figure to be just 3.2%. And don't forget, in October, they'd revised that down. For this year, growth is forecast to be 2.7%.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett, who's in New York for us. So, John, what are the main takeaways from this IMF report?
Yes, well, Robin and Juliet, Happy New Year, or not a very Happy New Year, with this news from the International Monetary Fund, which is the global organization for monetary coordination, basically saying that 2023 is going to be tougher than 2022 was, which is pretty difficult to swallow one way and another. Now, this is coming from the head of the IMF, who is Kristalina Georgieva. She's a Bulgarian economist, and you know her in Europe because she used to be the vice president of the European Commission. Now she heads the IMF in Washington, D.C., and she's been talking to one of those political programs that we have in America on a Sunday morning that tend to set the political agenda for the rest of the week. And at this time of year, they go outside the borders of the country and they talk about international issues. And on CBS's Face the Nation yesterday, she said that a third of the global economy will be in recession by the end of the year. That's the IMF's rather stark prediction, as you said, Juliet, there. And also more than that, she said even countries that don't go into recession will certainly feel it. Now, as you said at the intro there, the IMF downgraded or reduced its forecast for global growth in 2023 to about 2.7%. Remarkable, really, when just 2 years ago it was up around 6%. The reasons aren't difficult to work out. It's the Russian special operation in Ukraine. It's the inflation and the interest rates that are being put in place to try and bring 40-year high inflation down. And, of course, COVID-19 and the worry now about it spreading around the globe again. Now, economists generally think that the European Union is quite likely to go into recession in 2023. They are not sure still about the U.S. economy. We'll come on to that in just a second. And I think that Kristalina Georgieva herself said that China would have a very difficult start to 2023. And to back that up, we've just had the Beige Book published. This is a private survey, so-called because the cover of the book is actually beige. And this is looking at the final 3 months of the year in China, the fourth quarter then. And the Beige Book suggests that the quarter in China was likely a contraction, particularly among manufacturing and also the property sector. Juliet and Robin.
So, John, the US, one of those economies forecast to slow. What does Wall Street make of the report?
Well, Wall Street is off today, you know, Robin. It's very rare for Wall Street to have a 3-day holiday, but they are having one, and they had one just after Christmas as well. Now, the politicians in Washington, D.C., including the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, say that the U.S. can avoid a recession. It's a very politically potent word, as you can imagine. They say we can avoid a recession and that we're on course to bring interest rates back down to around 2%, though I think it may take some time. Wall Street is not so sure. In fact, Wall Street thinks there will be a recession in 2023, and they point to what they call the yield curve. Now, essentially, it's inverted. Now, essentially, what that means is that you get more money or the same amount of money or just a little bit more money for locking it away for 2 years in a government bond than you do for 10 years. That is not right. And when that happens, they call it a yield curve inversion, and it usually signals a recession. So Wall Street thinks one is on the way. Now, layoffs are increasing, particularly in the tech industry. We saw that last week with the number of jobless claims that was up by about 9,000. However, it is also true that hiring is still very, very strong here. And retail sales and things, although they're slowing, it's still pretty strong. It was strongish over the Christmas period. And you can't really have a recession, not really, if those two things are still heading upwards, which they seem to be. So the big question is, what will the Federal Reserve do in 2023? Wall Street will not pay much attention to the IMF. Of course, the big economists at the big banks will. But on Wall Street itself, they'll be worrying primarily about inflation and interest rates and jobs. And the next clue comes on Friday with what they call the non-farms jobs report. In other words, the government jobs report for the month of December. That comes up on Friday. Juliet and Robin?
John, thanks very much for that. That's our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
So the big drag on the global economy is the United States, China and the EU economies all expecting to shrink at the same time. So let's dig into this a bit more. I'm joined now by international economist Vicky Price. Great to see you, Vicky. Happy New Year. Look, it's alarming what we're hearing from Kristalina Georgieva. A wake-up call, some economists are saying. But is the head of the IMF really telling us anything we didn't already know?
Not particularly. We knew, of course, that there has been a slowdown in the world economy over the last few months. And you've seen that also in terms of confidence, business confidence most generally in the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries, in other words, the more advanced nations. We're already showing that there had been a decline over a period in confidence for the future, mainly, of course, because of the impact of the war in Ukraine and the increase in input costs, which is really, really very significant across the globe. And that, of course, has affected the willingness of businesses to go out and spend anything at all on sort of capital investment. And also, of course, individuals whose cost of living has increased very substantially and wages have not kept up with that inflation. And that's really at the center of what is underlying the reduced forecast, if you like, although we haven't seen the revisions yet. There will be more at the end of January, but the revisions that the International Monetary Fund is talking about are very much based on those principles, added to the fact that they are worried, in fact, even though they say that we need to do something to tackle inflation. It's an international issue, and I'm not sure whether we can, in each country, do anything very much about it in the short term. But lots of central banks are now raising interest rates in order to reduce demand in the economy and control inflation, and that looks synchronized, even though it's not coordinated. And the World Bank and the IMF worry that this synchronization of interest rate increases is going to affect both the developed nations and the developing ones.
And let's talk about that, because there will be some economies that are more vulnerable than others. Where do you think might bear the brunt of all this?
Well, of course, when you look at resilience to what is going on in Ukraine, well, obviously the US is a bit stronger. And yes, there's talk about recession there too. But in reality, we've still got to be convinced that this is indeed going to happen. Europe is quite affected by this, mainly because of the gas supply issue from Russia, which, of course, is something that they're dealing with right now. Cuts of those supplies have changed completely, even the industrial policy in Europe, and they're very vulnerable, even though recently they seem to have stabilized in terms of their industrial production, and confidence isn't really declining. In fact, in some countries it's improving. So it's interesting to look at Europe, but it's definitely affected already. They're trying to reduce energy consumption. That's going to affect quite a lot of areas of production in the future. But then, of course, there's China, where we know full well that the whole COVID issue is also one that is worrying the IMF in terms of what it means for other countries in the region exporting to China. Is that going to lead to yet another slowdown in growth for the short term? But most expectations are that after those first few months, we might see a bounce back in China and elsewhere. So yes, the year overall may not be very good, but we might see this pattern. Bad early on and an improvement later.
You're saying that in the short term you don't expect much to change. So what's it going to take? And when might we see a reversal of the world's fortune? I mean, you and I, we've talked about consumer confidence before, about that being key, and certainly to governments to getting back on track. I mean, what's your take?
My take has to do hugely with what happens to the rate of inflation. As inflation starts coming down, and there are signs that it is, unless there is an escalation again of the war in Ukraine, what we're likely to be seeing is a continuation of recent trends. Oil prices stabilizing, possibly coming down. They've already come down, of course, quite a lot. Gas prices have fallen quite substantially in the last few months, so that's good news. And also, of course, we've seen food prices reducing over a period of time, international food prices. I think it's been 7 or 8 months when those prices have either not increased but actually also fallen in various months. So that's good news. The problem is it takes a little bit of time for some of those impacts to be reflected in what the consumers are paying at the shops, for example, and what the input costs are for producers. So that's really what is going to determine, I think, whether that business and consumer confidence comes back, how fast inflation starts falling, and what the reaction of central banks is likely to be to that.
Vicky Price, always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The German economy continued to grow at a strong pace last month. The Purchasing Managers' Index, which charts confidence in the manufacturing sector, rose by almost 1% in December. The number of people in employment was also up to its highest point since East and West Germany reunified 30 years ago, with those working full-time up by over 500,000 compared to the same period in 2021. Turkey's trade deficit has jumped by almost 140% on this time last year. It's importing almost a third more goods than 12 months ago. The value of its currency, the lira, fell by almost 40% last year after a series of interest rate cuts by the central bank. But exports also rose, with Turkey almost doubling its trade volume with Russia as the country continues to bypass sanctions. Regulators in Poland have accused the country's T-Mobile of misleading advertising relating to a free mobile data offer. Authorities said the slogan, claiming a set amount of data was free for a year, did not give the full picture. The company could face a fine of up to 10% of its annual revenue. You're watching CGTN, still to come. Moscow and Kyiv clash over casualty numbers after an attack at an army base in Donetsk on New Year's Day.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Welcome back. And do remember that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Ukraine says around 400 Russian soldiers have been killed in a missile attack in the eastern Donetsk region. However, Moscow's challenged the figure, saying only 63 of their troops died in the blast at an army base in the city of Mykolaiv. Meanwhile, air raid sirens have continued to sound across the capital, Kyiv, as Russia continues its New Year bombing campaign.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent Stephanie Freed, who's in Kyiv. So, Stephanie, what are both sides saying about this?
Well, as you said, there are conflicting reports in terms of the numbers. Ukraine has a policy of not confirming, not saying when they have launched attacks or have had any hits on Russian targets. However, that's broadly believed to be, that's broadly understood, that is what happened, that HIMARS were launched onto the Donetsk region of eastern Ukraine. That's a Ukrainian area that is Russian-controlled, and launched specifically onto a training base, a military base, where new conscripts were training. Conflicting numbers. Some say dozens on the Moscow side. There are others who are saying hundreds. But for sure, certainly, one would expect that there will be retaliation, and retaliation coming on the heels of days of dozens and dozens of drone launches onto specifically targeting Kyiv, dozens of missile launches on cities throughout Ukraine. Now, those drones have, for the large part, been intercepted, and they are Iranian-made drones. And the interceptions, those successful interceptions, are leading to fueling speculation that Ukraine has had some help on the interceptions, notably from Israel, because those are Iranian-made drones for the most part. What we understand is that possibly back in 2022, Israel gave Ukraine some information about the weaknesses of the Shahid drone, which is what is being fired for the most part on these cities, and also about the functionalities of the drone. And that's the extent of the intelligence right now, because it's a very delicate situation with relations, Ukraine, Israel, Russia. So that's the tie-in there. But again, back to this latest hit on the military base, the expectation is, yes, that there is going to be a response from the Russian side.
So, Stephanie, air raid sirens sounding across Kyiv today. What's the situation where you are now?
Right now it's quiet, but the air raid sirens, that's not anything necessarily new. On New Year's Eve, there were air raid sirens, and there were hits, and there were people killed and injuries. And also, I mean, it's something that you see, you hear blasts, hearing them, seeing them. The thing is that the officials here are trying to impress upon people, especially because of the concern that right now Kyiv is going to be a target. That Russia will focus on Kyiv. So officials are trying to impress upon the citizens here to pay attention to the air raid sirens, to go to the shelters. That doesn't necessarily happen. It doesn't necessarily happen countrywide. People have become somewhat inured to those sounds of the sirens. But the situation right now, it's quiet. In a few hours, in 20 minutes, in 5 minutes, that could change.
Stephanie, thank you very much. Our correspondent Stephanie Freed in Kyiv.
2 Palestinians have been shot dead in the occupied West Bank as Israeli authorities demolished the homes of 2 gunmen. They're the first fatalities since Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu retook office last week, pledging to expand Jewish settlements in the region. Israeli troops said they were shot at and had rocks thrown at them as they moved into Jenin. The homes belong to 2 Palestinians who are said to have assassinated a top Israeli army chief last year and who were then killed themselves.
At least 24 inmates have escaped from a jail in Mexico after an armed attack in the northern border city of Juarez. 10 prison guards and 4 prisoners were killed, while 13 other people were hurt. It's not yet clear who carried out the attack. The state prosecutor said gunmen arrived at the prison early on New Year's Day and opened fire.
The UK Health Agency has stopped publishing COVID modelling data. It says projections on infection numbers are no longer needed as the country is now living with COVID, thanks to vaccination and treatments. The so-called R rate was first published in May 2020, near the start of the pandemic.
Morocco is banning all arrivals from China from January the 3rd to try and prevent a new wave of coronavirus infections. Thousands of tourists visit Morocco from China every year, usually travelling on flights that come via the Gulf. Several countries have brought in mandatory COVID testing for travellers from China due to a surge in cases.
Hospitals in Beijing are doing all they can to treat patients critically ill with COVID-19.
Our correspondent Lu So-Ray has been to Peking Union Medical College Hospital to learn more about how they're dealing with the recent wave of severe cases.
The medics are transferring a 97-year-old COVID patient to the ICU room. She remained stable in the regular bed for 4 days, but she has suddenly fallen into coma. Fortunately for her, another patient has just been transferred out from the ICU ward of the pulmonary department. This pulmonary ward opened for COVID-positive patients last week, and its experience in treating lung-related matter has turned it to a major battleground against COVID. Many of these medical workers have been to Wuhan in 2020, and now they're more confident in winning time for their patients. The elderly woman remains in coma. Medics are removing sputum from her airway and cleaning any buildup.
These 2 weeks, the patients got more severe. Usually we will have 5 patients and 1 spare bed, but right now it's usually full.
As the current wave of the severe cases hit hard, the hospital is performing their utmost to accept COVID-positive patients under critical conditions. To help with the situation, many internal medicine departments have strengthened forces of ICU staff running at full capacity. Even surgery departments are adding beds for COVID patients in critical conditions. This nurse from the urological department has been a major force in attending COVID patients in her department. I saw you just transfer the patients from urological department. COVID is a respiratory disease. Why is your department involved?
The hospital now is running all-out efforts in accepting COVID patients. We're also accepting COVID patients in critical conditions. Many of us received training for COVID treatment and attending when I went to support Wuhan in 2020.
As to Dr. Fan's ward as a whole, they have treated more than 50 patients since mid-December. Most of them are above 75 years old. More than 10 have successfully transferred out. 9 had died.
After 3 years, we are indeed more prepared than in Wuhan. We are equipped with more knowledge, more evidence, and more medications. We know better what's right and what to do than in Wuhan.
Medical workers here believe the war against COVID has not ended. But after 3 long years, they're beginning to see light at the end of the tunnel. Lu So-Ray, CGTN, Beijing.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. A new year and a new currency. European leaders welcome Croatia into the Eurozone.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, in the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Robin Dwyer and me, Juliet Mann. The headlines again. A third of the world in recession. The International Monetary Fund warns 2023 will be tough as the United States, Europe and China see their economies slow. And Ukraine and Moscow clash over casualty numbers after Kyiv hits a Russian army base in Donetsk.
Beijing is launching its version of an NFT marketplace. The government-backed China digital asset trading platform will be a secondary market for non-fungible tokens known in China as digital collectibles that complies with national regulations. So it won't be powered by blockchain and it won't use crypto as its currency. Well, let's talk now to Merav Uzair, who's a leading blockchain expert and fintech professor at Wake Forest University. Welcome to the programme. Good to have you with us. So NFTs are already popular in China, but there's a lot of regulation surrounding them, isn't there? So how will this new exchange work?
Having regulation is not a bad idea. The entire world is, and every country now is thinking about how to regulate NFTs. So having a regulated platform is not a bad idea because if you think about it, OpenSea, which is one of the largest universal NFT platforms, they just reported a while ago that they had a report that said that 80% of the NFTs that were created on the platform were fake. So there are a lot of scams, a lot of fake and et cetera, and a lot of unscrupulous activities. When there's money to be had, they always find unscrupulous activities. That's human behavior. So having something that is regulated to protect users' rights and protect creators' rights, this is not a bad idea. So I think. Sorry,
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I wondered if I could just sort of pin down, if you can, what's the difference between what China's doing to what the rest of the world is doing?
Well, the rest of the world hasn't regulated in the crypto space yet, and not mention, the NFT platform. The NFT platforms across the world are not regulated. OpenSea, which is, as I mentioned, which is the largest one, where most of the actions is happening, is not regulated at all. They're trying, to put their own, restrictions and trying to minimize all kinds of unscrupulous activities, but it's not regulated. I think the only one that is going to be regulated is the one in China, if you ask me. And maybe that will be the model that other countries, because they are thinking about how to regulate NFTs and how to regulate cryptocurrencies, how to regulate all these platforms. They are thinking about that. And maybe if they see this model of how it works in China, maybe that will be something that they will look at and decide, to follow, or and maybe with some differences and adjustments. But I think that will be a good step. Also the ruling that came out from China that basically equates, the rights of NFTs, like the rights for any asset that is traded in any e-commerce. I think that's a regulation in the right direction. And I think this is how the world eventually going to go in that direction. So I think this is all good. In my mind, it has. When it comes to trading, and this is what these platforms are all about. It's about trading and selling and buying and displaying and storing and all of that. Then this this platform should be regulated, and I have been advocating for that.
So what's the future for NFTs, do you think? We've seen crypto itself having quite a bumpy time. What do you think about NFTs? Are they here to stay?
Yes, they're definitely here to stay. And the reason why, because, you know, beyond that, because we had all this hype about this art and collectible, because I don't think, you know, that collectible, this is the only use case for NFTs. In fact, what we're going to see more, and this is what we're going to see more and more as in the years to come, is all the business and economic use cases, especially in the metaverse. And I know that China is investing extensively in the metaverse, and NFTs will be part of it. You know, everything in every asset in the metaverse is going to be an NFT. That's the way that you're going to authenticate it. There's no other way. I mean, the avatar is an NFT. Any asset is going to be an NFT. The transactions. So that NFTs with all these business use cases are really going to grow and scale.
Mira Avizer from Wake Forest University, good to talk to you today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Croatia has started the new year with a new currency, becoming the 20th member of the Eurozone.
Politicians and economists have been arguing about the possible benefits and the drawbacks against a backdrop of global economic uncertainty. Our correspondent Alyosha Milenkovic reports from Zagreb.
In the center of Zagreb, prices in this supermarket are shown both in the local currency, the kunas, and in euros. It's been like this for the past 6 months ahead of the euro's introduction.
Many people in Zagreb say Croatia's entry into the Eurozone is one of the most monumental and controversial issues since the country's founding 31 years ago. While some say it would mark the end of Croatia's independence, others back the move, believing it will boost the economy.
Some business owners see this as an opportunity to streamline their operations and reach out to the new markets. The owner of this video equipment company is one of them.
Over the last 20 years, all trade has been spoken and agreed upon in euros. In fact, nobody has talked about loans or purchasing an apartment in the local currency, only in euros. So the market is ready for this, and it will make doing business easier.
Dario hopes the move to the euro will lead to less paperwork and red tape. Meanwhile, some experts claim the move will help certain aspects of the Croatian economy.
It's a big deal. This monetary fog that no one understands will disappear, like what is a foreign currency, what is a national currency. All of that will disappear. The accounts will become simpler and cleaner, and everything will be in euros. The government's accounts, private accounts, bank balances, all of those.
However, not everybody believes ditching the national currency is the best move. Here is Professor of Economics and former MP in the National Assembly, Ivan Lovrinovic, while vlogging for social networks about the drawbacks of entering the Eurozone. He believes opponents to the move have been sidelined.
The question now is why countries more developed than Croatia are more prepared for Eurozone membership, like Hungary, Czechia, Poland, don't even think about adopting the euro. Why? Because in the current destabilizing geopolitical conditions, the most important thing is to keep your national currency so you can control the crisis.
Like other skeptics, Ivan Lovrinovic says Croatia is not ready for membership of the Eurozone. But ready or not, the new year is bringing a new currency to Croatia. Alyosha Milenkovic, CGTN, Zagreb.
The rate of shop closures in the UK is accelerating. On average, 47 high street businesses closed their doors for the final time each day of 2022. Our correspondent Nui Jabarko has been following this story for us. Nui.
Thanks, Juliet. Let's take a closer look at these figures. Pretty stark. More than 17,000 sites closed down in 2022. That's the highest number of shop closures in 5 years. According to the Centre for Retail Research, total closures were nearly 50% higher last year than they were in 2021. So a marked acceleration in shops shutting down, but that also means that jobs went as well. If you look at the number of roles lost in the retail sector, they soared. More than 150,000 positions were gone in 2022. That's up more than 40% compared to the previous year, all of which means the outlook for the retail sector looks pretty gloomy.
Well, come on, let's dig into this a little more, because those figures, pretty concerning, although I'm sure you're going to tell me, well, we're still shopping, we're just shopping online. Why so many shop closures?
Yeah, well, shopping online, you touched upon it there. That's been one key factor driving things for the retail sector all across the world, making physical retail much more challenging. But two key things here in the UK. I think one was the COVID-19 pandemic. We remember the scenes of high streets completely deserted as the government stepped in and, with things like the furlough scheme, gave businesses wages for workers even though the shops remained closed. Last year, as the economy reopened, those restrictions went away. What's happened was that many businesses simply couldn't keep up with the expenditure, so that's had an impact. The other thing has been, once again, a global issue: inflation and the cost of living. Double figures here in the UK. There aren't many developed parts of the world when it comes to industrialised economies where the figures are that high, and that's had a knock-on effect on consumer confidence and meant people are reining in spending, and that's had another big impact, particularly on high streets in key parts of the United Kingdom.
So is there any chance of a turnaround for shopping in person?
Well, we heard from Prime Minister Rishi Sunak his New Year's Day message, offering some glimmer of hope for the economy, but also saying that things were going to remain hard in 2023. When you look closer at the figures, the interesting thing was usually the headlines are taken by retail chains, the likes of major household names when they go bust, but more than 6,000 retail chain stores closed in the UK last year. If you look at independent stores, more than 11,000 of those closed. And I think that touches on, Juliet, the point you raised about online shopping, how smaller businesses don't see value in physical retail anymore. The pandemic meant businesses moved online, and many are thinking twice about putting money into bricks and mortar. Just in terms of the turnaround being offered by the government, business rates, that's been a long complaint by many business owners up and down the country. The government has done something there, offering a 75% discount up to about $130,000. But these are major changes which are happening not just here in the UK, the rise of online shopping, the end of the high street, but for the Conservative government, I think it's a particularly hot topic, because they know in rural parts of the country the high street is still important for the fabric of life in Britain, and they're vote winners as well. So if they can try and ensure that those parts of life are still familiar to people across the UK, it could help them as they try and overturn a big deficit they have in the polls at the moment for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak.
Nareed, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Nareed Jabalkil.
Still ahead on Global Business Europe, the sky is the limit. How 2022 saw space exploration reach new heights.
I fell in love with Chinese culture the second I started to experience it.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers.
Building bridges is a natural thing. There is no age and gender difference in our spirit, no race difference in our soul.
I think food is an incredible way of bringing different cultures together. I am enjoying learning every aspect about it.
Chinese literature stretches back for millennia, but it's still really relevant for today.
I hope that Chinese and British fashion community could be more frequently communicating with each other.
An incredible mix of people, cultures, food, and there is so much to see and so much to do.
I have a great desire to make the Chinese civilization more accessible.
It's about our future generation's future.
The craftsmanship, the technique, the material uses, the color uses.
You can kind of take things on board and continue to develop and grow.
Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dare to think beyond the horizon and open up our world.
Everything seems to have a story. I just think that's absolutely beautiful. A huge tick.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe.
Brazil's new president is promising to overturn the policies of his predecessor, vowing to protect the Amazon and rebuild a country he says is in terrible ruins. Supporters of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva partied into the early hours after he was sworn in. He's accused former far-right leader Jair Bolsonaro of genocide over his handling of the COVID pandemic and says people who made mistakes will be held accountable. Bolsonaro has yet to officially concede defeat in October's election.
Also in Brazil, Brazilians are saying goodbye to its greatest ever footballer, Pelé. Fireworks celebrated the king of football as his coffin was driven to the stadium in Santos, where he played throughout his career. Pelé became a household name in 1958 when he was just 17, and then he scored that spectacular series of goals and helped Brazil win its first World Cup. He remains the only player ever to win 3 World Cups. He died on Thursday at the age of 82. Our Associated Press correspondent Maurizio Savarese is at the stadium in Santos. Thanks for joining us, Maurizio. Now, what are we expecting to happen in coming hours?
Well, here at the Vila Belmiro Stadium is a place where Pelé used to call home, and his last wishes were to be receiving fans here and his crowds of flowers. He was obsessed with Santos. All of his friends said that. And now he's getting the tributes he deserves. We can see a lot of banners around the stadium saying he was the king of football, that he was the only footballer to stop a war, in a reference to a case from the 60s when he visited Africa. And friends are also on the side, authorities. President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva is expected to come sometime between tonight and tomorrow morning. And fans here in Santos seem to agree that Pelé was suffering a lot. He's a legend for the city. He changed the city and put it on the map. And now people are paying their last tribute 5 meters away from the king himself. His coffin is open and they can see him. It's emotional, of course, but a lot of people are saying, well, he deserved the last respects to be as beautiful as they're being as of now.
You say it's very emotional. How is everyone feeling? Because Pelé symbolises quite a lot for Brazilians, doesn't he?
Well, a lot of people believe that he created modern Brazil, because when Brazil won the World Cup in 1958, it wasn't very known outside Brazil. Most people didn't know exactly where Brazil was. And Pelé managed to put Brazil on the map with that victory. And people seem to think of him as a person who, pop icon that also was in soap operas, films. He was a part of Brazil's public life as a culture minister as well. People understood that he was in pain and he was in difficulties, so they are excited about his legacy, upset with his departure, but also trying to honor his legacy.
The footballer also featured at the swearing-in of Brazil's new president on Sunday. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, the president of the Senate, Rodrigo Pacheco, asked for a minute of silence for Pelé and for Emeritus Pope Benedict as well. But everyone in Brazil is upset with Pelé's departure in different ways. And apparently we're going to have honors and tributes for the next few weeks, even after he's buried tomorrow in a cemetery just 6 meters away from the Vila Belmiro Stadium.
Maurizio Savarese, thank you very much.
Rescuers in Vietnam are battling to free a 10-year-old boy who became trapped in a 35-metre-deep hole 2 days ago. The boy fell into the shaft of a hollow concrete pillar just 25 centimetres wide, apparently while looking for scrap metal. Rescuers have tried drilling and softening the surrounding soil to try and pull the pillar up to save the boy. His current condition is uncertain. He stopped interacting with the outside, although oxygen has been pumped into the hole.
4 people have been killed in a mid-air collision between 2 helicopters in Australia. The accident happened near a SeaWorld resort on the Gold Coast as one helicopter was taking off and the other was landing. 8 other people were injured, 3 of them critically. The police say the location of the crash site on a sandbank made rescue efforts more difficult.
China's new foreign minister, Qin Gang, has spoken with his US counterpart, Antony Blinken, to discuss future relations between the two countries. Qin was appointed on Friday after 17 months as ambassador to the United States. He's reported to have vowed to continue close working relations with Blinken to try and improve bilateral ties.
It's been an exciting year for space exploration. China completed the main structure of its space station. The ISS got its first female European commander, and NASA launched the first flight in its long mission to put humans back on the moon. Our correspondent Peter Oliver reports.
Launched in June, China's Shenzhou 14 mission may well go down as one of the busiest in the history of China's manned space program. The team of taikonauts, led by Commander Cheng Dong, along with operator Li Yuyang and system operator Cai Zijie, carried out 3 crucial spacewalks to attach the Wentian lab module to China's Tiangong orbiting space station. The lab, which completes Tiangong's main structure, will allow taikonauts, as well as international partners, to carry out prolonged experiments in zero gravity and the vacuum of space. Then in November, there was a historic handover as the Shenzhou 14 team welcomed their replacement crew, meaning the space station supported 6 people for the first time. The Shenzhou 14 team arrived home at the beginning of December to praise from their chief.
The 3 taikonauts did very well during the mission, showing their extraordinary mental and physical qualities. I think these well-trained taikonauts set a good example. After they entered the space station in orbit, they adapted very well and quickly to the environment and finished the job there brilliantly.
European astronauts also had a busy 2022, with Italian Samantha Cristoforetti becoming the first European woman to command the International Space Station, and the first ESA astronaut to carry out a spacewalk using the latest version of the Russian Orlan spacesuit. She drew much attention in China when she posted lines by the 4th century Chinese poet Wang Shijie online. Looking up, I see the immensity of the cosmos. Bowing my head, I look at the multitude of the world. The gaze flies, the heart expands. The joy of the senses can reach its peak. And indeed, this is true happiness. Cristoforetti has been praised for her Chinese linguistic skills. The Italian speaks half a dozen languages and has previously taken part in joint training between ESA and the China Manned Space Agency. I later caught up with her in Germany and asked her about the significance of the poem.
I wish I could take credit for that. I have a good friend, an Italian, who has lived in China for 30 years. He's a sinologist, very knowledgeable on Chinese literature, and he suggested that to me, and it sounded like a great excerpt. So unfortunately, I cannot take credit for choosing it, but only for choosing a smart friend.
NASA was also busy in 2022. After a few delays, it successfully launched the Orion capsule, the first big step in the Artemis program to send humans back to the moon. It's seen as a step towards an eventual manned mission to Mars, and some of the experiments on Artemis 1 certainly sounded like they were lifted straight from science fiction.
Because when we look at going to Mars, we know that we're probably going to need to grow some crops, like they've done in the movies and on TV, and how we do on the space station. So we want to see how radiation is going to affect seeds that we might send to Mars.
The closest I'm likely to get to the stars is the planetarium here in Berlin. That is, of course, unless one of the space agencies involved wants to make a very big call. I am open to all and any offers, just going to leave that out there. But back in reality, 2023 promises some tantalizing missions. SpaceX from the United States are going to be offering the first ever commercial spacewalk in March, while China's CGTN space telescope is slated to be fully operational by the end of the year. Peter Oliver, CGTN, Berlin.
Well, here on Earth, there are warnings that life is going to get hotter in 2023, with summer temperatures expected to overtake last year's. That's after a European summer that broke records, sparked wildfires and hurt businesses. Our correspondent Alex Carrier reports from Brussels.
Europe faced its worst drought in 500 years in the summer of 2022. The heat waves meant soil conditions across the continent were some of the driest ever recorded, with the lack of rainfall triggering some extreme events. Wildfires raged through several parts of the continent, burning more than 770,000 hectares. Spain was the worst affected, with Portuguese, Greek and French firefighters also battling blazes for weeks, forcing thousands to be evacuated from their homes. In Germany, meanwhile, drought conditions meant water levels in the Rhine River reached a record low, nearly stopping river traffic altogether. This river is an all-important trade artery for Europe, but low water levels mean that barges could only carry 1/3 of their usual cargo, a fact which had serious knock-on effects for industry across Europe. And the Rhine wasn't the only water management headache for European authorities. The Netherlands had to take emergency action to ensure its network of 19th century peat dikes didn't collapse. Record dry soil meant these were at risk of crumbling, threatening to flood neighbouring farms and villages. Experts say this kind of drought could become Europe's new normal.
For a good part of Europe, yes, I would agree that things will get worse in terms of drought, and we need to be prepared for it. So heat wave will become more frequent, more intense, and evaporation will go up. And so even if the precipitation were not to change too much, still this will result in less water on the surface.
Drought conditions also hampered Europe's ability to generate energy, with low water levels making it difficult to cool France's all-important nuclear power stations. 2022 was also a challenging year for vineyards in southern Europe, with French winemakers forced to irrigate their crops, a measure only used in extreme circumstances. But the hot weather wasn't all bad. In fact, it was an unexpected boon for one of Europe's up-and-coming wine regions. Belgian winemakers had one of their best years ever, with consistent warm weather leading to a particularly fruitful harvest.
This weather reassures our customers. They often associate good weather with good wine. So Belgian consumers are turning more and more to local wine because they trust in the quality of our production, because the weather has been so good.
Despite this silver lining, summer 2022 will be remembered as particularly challenging for Europe. As temperatures in many parts of Europe dip below freezing, it's now pretty hard to imagine quite how hot and how dry things got last summer. But the reality is, the challenges faced in 2022 were not a blip. Experts say that drought, heat waves and wildfires could all be part of our new normal in the years to come. Alex Cadier, CGTN, Brussels.
Now, they're so small, you can't see them, but they're hugely important. The world is seeing an alarming loss of beneficial microbes, and that in turn is having an effect on our health.
Our correspondent Guy Henderson went to visit the world's first microbe zoo in Amsterdam to find out more.
Microbes, or microorganisms, form the foundations of our ecosystems. As our urban landscapes have become increasingly sanitised and less biodiverse, there is building research that shows the depletion of these invisible allies and the negative effect this is having on our health.
So I've come to Amsterdam to find out just how central microbes are, both to human health and the environment more broadly. The world's first microbe zoo. So Micropia, OK, we're attached to a zoo, but this is a particularly special part of the zoo, isn't it?
Yeah. We make invisible life visible, a world of bacteria, fungi, viruses, well, you name it. And it's actually the first time ever that this has been done.
Welcome to Microbe. Jasper, a very basic question. What is a microbe?
We're not completely sure as well. I mean, there's many different definitions on what microbes are, but we're kind of sticking to the easiest one. And that's life that's too small to be seen by the naked eye. That means it's bacteria, fungi, yeast, algae, microanimals like the water bears or tardigrades. And to some microbiologists, even viruses are part of the microbe world.
Give us a sense, Jasper, of just how important microbes are.
Microbes have been on this planet for billions of years, nearly 4 billion years. And we've only been here for a few 100,000. The entire planet actually runs on microbes. Every ecosystem starts and ends with microbes. Every food chain, the oxygen production in our atmosphere is mainly microbial. And that also means that our bodies also run on microbes. So our own ecosystem is also microbial.
OK, so we're in the large intestine now, which is sort of the centre of the microbial presence inside the human body, is that right?
Yeah, it's actually kind of the capital of your microbiome. About 99% of everything you have in and on you is in your intestines, and it's about 100,000 billion bacteria, which makes you actually more microbe than human. A lot of people, of course, know that they're important for digestion, but they also produce a lot of hormones and vitamins that your body can't produce itself. They train your immune system. They're kind of a first-line defense to keep pathogens away. And recently we also discovered that they're having a big impact on how you're feeling and how you're behaving through the so-called gut-brain axis. And nowadays you see that more and more psychologists, for instance, are actually looking at an imbalance in your intestinal flora to explain why you might be feeling depressed or have other mental issues. So from top to bottom, they're really important for the functioning and the health of your body.
The sanitisation of urban spaces has reduced the diversity of microbes in cities, and lack of exposure to microbes from an early age is thought to have a number of consequences.
That shift in diversity, that depletion of diversity, has had many different effects on our health, which is simply because we're not in contact with microbes anymore. We're not in contact with nature, and that means that we get a kind of a lazy immune system that starts reacting to harmless substances, which means an allergy, or even starts reacting to your own body cells, which means an autoimmune disease. So that drift away from nature that we see nowadays in our Western society really is starting to affect our own health.
Jasper Buick's head of Artis Micropia, ending that report by Guy Henderson.
Our headlines again. A third of the world in recession. The International Monetary Fund warns that 2023 will be tough as the United States, Europe and China see their economies slow.
Ukraine and Moscow clash over casualty numbers after Kyiv hits a Russian army base in Donetsk.
And the high street in crisis as more shops shut for good in the UK than at any time in the last 5 years.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.